Getting very many people with the live stream or Facebook on any of the services or classes?
Yeah. And this is in honor of the day today. Let's see if we can hear it. All right, what's the connection?
Hello.
It's Bastille Day.
Oh.
All right, so we'll jump on in here. And 1 second. Just gonna do a little tweak here. Okay, and sharing screen. Hold on, I don't know why it's not there. Let's try again. There you go. And excellent. Okay. So hopefully others will join us in a little bit. We'll see. So this week's Parsha is a double Parsha again. It's Matot Maseh. And there's a lot of different stuff going on here. But I wanted to take a look at one of the sections, one of the storylines that I've always found kind of interesting. It's a story of the tribes of Reuven and Gad, and a little bit of Manasseh, half of Manasseh, saying, you know what, Moses, that little bit of land, like that land over on the other side of Jordan, like I understand God gave that to us, but we actually really like it where we are right here. So what do you say? How about we just hang out here? So we're going to take a look at this section. This is really the entirety of chapter 32 from the book of Numbers. And we're going to take a look kind of section by section and really understand exactly what's going on and see if kind of what's problematic with the language and various things so we can actually understand what the final resolution was. So any questions or thoughts before we just jump right in? No? Great. Okay. So we're chapter 32 of Book of Numbers. So the tribes of Reuben and Gad owned cattle in very great numbers, noting that the lands of Yazer and Gilad were a region suitable for cattle. The tribes of Gad and Reuben came to Moses, Eleazar the Kohen, and the chieftains of the community, and said, Atarot and Dibon and Yazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, El-Aleh, Sebam, Nebo, and Baon, the land that Adonai has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor to us, they continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan. Right, so they like this area. Let's understand exactly what it is, where it is that we're talking about, because I think this is kind of important to actually understand here. Okay. So this map helps us out a lot anyways because it shows us where all the tribes are. And so we can focus in on Reuven and Gad. And we can see like Nebo, Har Nebo, at Mount Nebo, one of the towns that's mentioned here, Heshbon, Yazer. So all these little areas are what we've heard about. We know that we've just defeated the Ammonites a couple weeks ago. And we wanted to pass through Moab in this area, and the Moabites said, nope, you can't come through. And that's when they hired Balaam to try to curse us. And obviously it doesn't really go too well. So either way, we can get a sense of this is kind of where we are before we're getting ready to cross over the Jordan River to get into the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan, which will become the land of Israel. So it just gives us the sense of where they're at. And we can see that all the other Israelites, right, they settled west of the Jordan, and half of Manasseh, Gad and Reuben, decided they want to be east of the Jordan River. So any of us who have ever spent time in Israel, we know what this land actually looks like right here. Right on the western border of where they're at, there are some steep red cliffs, really beautiful red rock. And below it, you have these wide open plains. And you also have the river running through there. So if you have wide open plains with a river, you can very easily dig trenches, and you can have wide open fields where you can be raising your cattle, and it's perfectly suitable. I'm sure 3,200 years ago was probably a little less arid than it is today. So it could be a nice place to have your cattle set up. It's nowhere near as rocky as it is over here in Judea, or as it would be further east. And it's not as arid as it would be if they were further south in Edom. Right? So, it seems like, okay, it makes sense. This is relatively good land if you're going to be raising cattle. Right, this is what they want. But there's a problem. It's not the land that God necessarily offered up. Now, to be fair to them, yes, the idea is they're supposed to be crossing the Jordan into the land, and that's why Moses is not allowed to cross the Jordan River. However, in the various points in the Tanakh where it lays out what the borders of Israel are, at one point it says from the Egyptian river to the river of Prat. So actually a huge chunk of land, which would really be almost the entire Levant, is what God first promises. And then we also have the land from the Sinai all the way up, and by the Prat is going to be Euphrates, right? So far, right? So, but this idea of really large amount of land could technically include this land. So maybe they're not actually being so rebellious here, except we know that they have to actually cross over the Jordan and they have to defeat this land. Even if they want this land, that's kind of problematic. So we're going to go on and see what Moses' response is to them. All right. Any questions before we continue off of this map? Yeah, Carol.
We might have covered this multiple times, but some of the tribes have a teeny bit of land and others have a huge amount. And how is that apportioned?
So it's apportioned, as was read in last week's Parsha. It's based on numbers. That's the reason why we took another census this last Shabbat. The census was not for military strength. Rather, it was to get a sense of how many people and then how they would have to divide up the land amongst the people.
Okay.
And, some land might be more inhabitable than other land. So all this land of Judah, that's a really large bit of land, except on the other hand, it's also a lot of rocky mountains, and it's not the idea of living at Masada didn't really occur to anybody until Herod. I mean, people probably use it as a military fortress, but it's not really the type of place where you want to be living and setting up large settlements. Mm-hmm. So, but it is based on that census that we had last week.
Thank you.
Okay. And the tribe of Dan also was, I think it was 60,000 people, but then 24,000 people died last Shabbat. So, their numbers were relatively small in the end, which is why Dan has a relatively small bit of land here. Okay, but let's keep going here. So Moses is incensed. He can't believe what he's hearing. So Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, "Are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that Adonai has given them?" And now here he goes on a little tangent, talking about you are exactly like the scouts who came back and gave a bad report and scared everybody into going, from not wanting to go into the land, and that's why we've been wandering for 40 years. It's all because of you guys, and people like you. Right? But then he goes on. He says, Adonai was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years God made them wander in the wilderness until the whole generation that had provoked Adonai's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to Adonai's wrath against Israel. If you turn away from God and God abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people. Right? Which is not a completely unrealistic kind of response. Right? We've been wandering for all this time. We're getting ready at some point soonish to enter into the land of Israel. And And the whole reason we've been wandering is because people came back and said, oh, that land is too scary for us to go into. Let's just kind of stay where we're at. And now we have the tribes of Gad and Reuven, and they say, you know what, we'd like to stay over here. They don't say it's because they're afraid of going into the land of Canaan. They don't say they're afraid of the people. But it should raise a lot of flags. Like, so why don't they want to go? Like, God's giving us this other land, and now they're asking for this land? Like, that doesn't make much sense. And so Moses rightfully is concerned that the other tribes are going to start freaking out, and they'll say, oh, you know what? We have all that land of Ammon that we just defeated, so why don't we just stay over there? Like, let's just rest on our laurels and not worry about having to do any more fighting, lest we lose. So understandably, he's upset. So the tribes then counter, and they come back with some conditions. So they stay. Then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children, and we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion, but we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. Okay. So let's go through and really understand what they are saying and the order in which they are saying. We're going to build sheepfolds for our flocks. We're going to build towns for our children, fortified towns for our children. Then we'll serve as shock troops while our children stay in the fortified towns. And then once the land of Canaan is the land of Israel, we'll return home, right? But they're saying we don't want anything that God's given west of the Jordan. What else is missing from their words here? Or even what are some of your initial thoughts at what they're offering up here?
Well, it seems very generous at first, and they're saying that, they're recognizing they've already received their share of the land. I don't see what else is missing.
Joel, how about you?
I think it's reasonable. There's something in the Hebrew, vayigashu, meaning to draw near, I believe, is a negotiating tactic that's usually very good. Person-to-person interaction. And then, of course, saying, yes, we'll do this, blah, blah, blah. Now it's back up to Moshe.
All right. It seems relatively reasonable. But as we're about to see, Moshe is not happy at all. One, with what not so much she's unhappy with what they're offering, but is really unhappy with the way that they are offering it. So we'll take a look at what his response is. So Moses counters their proposal. Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of Adonai, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of Adonai, until God has dispossessed God's enemies before God, and the land has been subdued at the instance of Adonai, and then you return, you shall be clear before Adonai and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under Adonai. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against Adonai, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised. Okay. So even before we look at the kind of breakdown, notice any differences in what Moses has said versus what they have said?
Well, it's the order in which they said something and then in which God said something.
Well, which Moses says it, but,
Moses, okay.
But 7 times we have Adonai here.
Yeah.
7 times it says Adonai, which is pretty remarkable, considering that when the tribes of Reuven and Gad spoke, they didn't mention Adonai once. All right, so Moses is trying to say, hey, you guys might have forgotten something here. You think that this is your land to possess. Yeah, but there's somebody who actually gives you that possession. It's not just yours to take, it's yours to receive. Right? So first of all, let's not forget that. 7 times he says Adonai here. Lifnei Adonai. That's a big deal. Then he goes through and he says, okay, if you serve as shock troops before Adonai, All of you cross the Jordan before Adonai. You uproot the Canaanites before Adonai. You conquer the land before Adonai. Then you return east of the Jordan before Adonai. Build towns for your children and build sheepfolds for your flock. Right? So what Moshe does is he completely reverses the order. Right? It doesn't even play with the order. He completely reverses the order. And why do we think he reverses the order? What was problematic with the way they said it?
Well, it seems like they were waiting to get themselves settled before they were going to come and assist the rest of the Israelites instead of helping first.
So they're taking care of themselves and their families first, right? So, we're worried about our children, and so we're going to take care of our children. Well, do you think the other tribes aren't worried about their children too? They still have to go to battle, so, maybe you might want to rethink that. But what else? If we go back up to the last section. So what's the order that the tribes offer everything up? Flocks, then children, then they fight. Mm-hmm. And here Moses says, no, you fight, you support all the people. Then you take care of your children, then you take care of your flocks. Right? Their priorities were completely out of whack. For them, their economic stability, their finances, their flocks, was the very first thing they mentioned. That was the very top priority. If you go based on the things that we talk about, like the way that we speak, we often mention our top priorities first. Here they mention their top priority is their financial interest. Then they talk about their children. And then finally after that, they talk about, okay, and the other Israelites. And Moses completely flips that on the head and says, no, you're right. Kol Yisrael Arvim Zeh Bazeh. We are all mixed up with one another. So that should be a top priority. Then you can worry about your individualistic needs, or your particularistic needs, your children. And children definitely should take priority over your financial interest, right? Your sheep will be fine. It might be more work for you to have to, chase them down or fight off wild animals, but your children should be more of a priority than your animals, right? So Moses, you can imagine, he's still really pissed. Right? He's not happy with the way that these tribes are speaking. Okay. Any questions, thoughts before we go? Okay.
Were they expecting the sheep and the flocks and the children to go with them on the other side of Jordan and be there while they're fighting, and then everyone returns?
Well, let's hold off on that question for a minute. We will answer that. So I just want to look at a comment here which says, and do that which your mouths have uttered. This is the last thing that Moses says here, right? Build towns, right? But do what you have promised, right? V'hayotze mipichem tasu, right? So he says, right, and but do that which your mouths have uttered, what you've promised. Moses wanted them to understand that the permission he had granted for these tribes to build cities for their women and children was not absolute, but was conditional on their fulfilling the part of full participation with the other tribes in their conquest of the land of Canaan. Right? So right, he says you can do the stuff, but he says, but that thing that you promised first, you got to do that. Right? You have to go fight. You can do the other stuff, but first you have to fight. And so Moses is really trying to make sure that they know this is conditional. You fight and then you go. Right? So what would that look like? To answer your question, Carol, we're going to see another commentary in a little bit that will help explain that a little bit more. Okay. So the tribes agree. They say, right, the tribes of Gad and Reuven answered Moses, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all our other livestock will stay behind in the towns of Gilad, while your servants, all those recruited for war, cross over at the instance of Adonai to engage in battle, as my Lord orders. Okay. It's important we notice here, though. When it says my Lord commands and as my Lord orders, Adoni is the Hebrew, right? We see Adoni. The word Adoni is my Lord. Adonai, technically my Lord's, but that's right, the name of God. But Adoni just means my Lord. So we're talking about Moses. They are talking about Moses when they say this. So they say, we will do this. Our children, wives, and flock. Okay, so they got the priority, children, right, then wives and flocks, right, and all other livestock. They will stay behind in Gilad, meaning we're not going to build new fortified towns for them. Whatever towns we have already defeated, they will just live in those towns exactly as they are. So they'll stay behind, but we will continue and go and fight for you. At the instance of Adonai, Lifnei Adonai. So we'll do this before God. So Moses said God, Lifnei Adonai 7 times. They say Lifnei Adonai once, and then they just say, just as, as you, Moses, have spoken. All right? So, all right. It seems like seems maybe okay. But Moses still isn't terribly thrilled. So what does Moses say? Moses then gave instructions concerning them to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes. Moses said to them, if every shock fighter among the Gadites and the Reubenites crosses the Jordan with you to do battle at Lifnei Adonai, at the instance of God, and the land is subdued before you, you shall give them the land of Gilad as a holding. But if they do not cross over with you as shock troops, they shall receive holdings among you in the land of Canaan. Okay. So, again, it seems pretty clear that what he's saying is, let the women and children stay behind, but these guys have to fight. And if they don't fight, those women and children are going to have to come over with them. Right? But actually, he doesn't even really say that. It seems like maybe the women and children are going to have to come over with them as well. It says, but first they have to fight, then they can get the land. Right? The Gadites and the Reubenites said in reply, whatever Adonai has spoken concerning your servants, that we will do. We ourselves will cross over as shock troops at the instance of Adonai into the land of Canaan, and we shall keep our hereditary holding across the Jordan. And so here, it's not just whatever you, Moses, has said, right? Before, notice they said, we will cross over Lifnei Adonai in the instance of God, as Moses orders. Here they say, we will cross over before God, right, as God has spoken. Right? Asher diber Adonai, whatever God has said. So here they're now saying, okay, they are acknowledging the instructions not coming from Moses, the instructions coming from God. And finally, Moses is happy with what he's heard. So Moses assigned to them, to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, which is weird because they're not part of the conversation at all up to this point, the kingdom of Sichon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of King Og of Bashan, the land with its various cities and the territories of their surrounding towns. The Gadites rebuilt Dibon, Atarot, Arer, Atrot, Shofan, Yazer, Yogbeha, Beit Nimra, and Beit Haran as fortified towns or as enclosures for flocks. And the Reubenites built Cheshbon, Elaleh, Kiryatayim, Nevo, Baal Meon, some names being changed, and Sibma, they gave their own names to towns that they built. The descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilad and captured it, dispossessing the Amorites who were there. So Moses gave Gilad to Machir, son of Manasseh, and he settled there. Yair, son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages, which he renamed Chavot Yair. And Novah went and captured Kenat and its dependencies, renaming it Novah after himself. Novach after himself. Okay, and that's the end of the chapter. So finally, Moses is happy with what he's heard, and decides to give them land. But let's understand a little bit more what's going on here. So the tribes of Gad and Reuven answered. They were saying as follows, and this is going back to Moses says, here's a stipulation, and they finally say, okay, as God says. Right? This is them answering. They were saying as follows, you, our master, do not need to command us with a double-sided condition, because we would never, God forbid, transgress what you, our master, has commanded. Your command is the word of Hashem, and we would never transgress it. This is the meaning of, as Adonai has spoken to your servants, as opposed to the previous promise they made, your servants will do as my master instructs. So here, the idea of Moses trying to get them to commit, twice, and they're like, okay, fine. The first time wasn't enough of us just invoking your name, Moses. Now we will also invoke God's name. The reason we didn't do that the first time is because your word is as good as God's word. Ramban is being incredibly generous to these tribes, I believe. Right? These tribes seem to have a complete lack of a conviction when it comes to Adonai. which is probably why they left that out the first time they made a commitment. But here, the second time, okay, that's good enough for Moses. Or Chaim on this says, it's possible that initially even Moses had not meant for the 2.5 tribes to actually acquire their claim until after they demonstrated fulfillment of their part of the bargain. However, once Moses realized how firmly these 2.5 tribes had committed themselves to helping the other tribes, he agreed to give them possession of these lands immediately. So one of the things that's going on here is that Moses said, you just have to go and fight until the land is conquered. But the tribes actually go above and beyond and say, not only will we go until the land is conquered, we will actually go until all the Israelites have settled in the land, and then we'll return. Which actually takes a number of additional years. One estimate is up to 14 additional years. And so they're saying, as long as you'll give us this land, we will give you even more of our time to make sure that the Israelites are safe in the land of Israel, before we take our inheritance. And this is when Moses said, okay, finally, sure, all right, sounds good. So you guys, because you're being so generous, we'll let you have the land now. You can let your women and children live and flocks stay there while you continue and fight. And you'll be separated for quite a while, but if that's the price that you're willing to pay for this land, so be it. But let's understand a little bit more of what's going on here, because there's a fantastic commentary here. And Moses, this is Sforno, and Moses gave them only because he did not want to get involved in a serious quarrel with these 2 tribes. He didn't want to quarrel with these 2 tribes, really these 2.5 tribes. So what is it about Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh that might give him some pause? What has happened in the last couple Shabbatot that would make Moses maybe think twice before trying to get into a spitting contest with these guys? I'll give you a hint. We're going to scroll down a bit, and we're going to look at a nice little chart that I made up a while back. Leah and Zilpah being Leah's handmaid, and Bilhah and Rachel, Bilhah being Rachel's handmaid. So if we look on this chart, Reuven, Gad, Manasseh. So what is it about Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh that kind of echoes tropes from the last few weeks? If we think back to Parshat Korach, right? At Parshat Korach was a cousin of Moshe and Aaron, but he was joined by leaders from the tribe of Reuven, right? Because Reuven was the firstborn. And the entire argument there was more about birth order, right? That Korach felt he descended from an older son of Levi, and therefore then Moshe and Aaron did, and therefore he should be more fitting to be a leader. And even if we're not talking about taking over the leadership in general, he had a real issue with with them choosing a middle child of the youngest son of Kehat to be the leader of the Kehatites. And here Korach's like, I should actually be the leader of the Kehatites because of birth order. And so that was their gripe. And Reuven, the tribe of Reuven, felt like, well, no, we actually should be the ones who are in charge of everything that's going on here because, we're actually the oldest born of Jacob. And then if we remember what happened last week with Pinchas, the very beginning, the very end of Balak, and the very beginning of Pinchas, with Pinchas killing Zimri ben Salu, who was the head of Shimon, the next oldest, right? So you got all these guys who are from a higher birth order, who have been trying to stake their claim and really testing Moshe constantly. Now here all of a sudden we have another group of leaders approaching Moshe, representing firstborns. Reuven, firstborn of Leah. Gad, firstborn of Zilpah. Manasseh, the firstborn of Osnat, the firstborn of Yosef. Right? So Yosef being one of the younger ones, but Manasseh is actually the older. And if you remember, when Jacob went to adopt the children as his own and bless them, he switched hands and blessed Ephraim first He elevated the younger son above the older son. So here you've got all these older sons who feel like they are constantly getting short shrift. And Moses now has this decision to make. Do I want to engage in another spitting contest with these people? And do I want to risk another uprising and another plague and more people dying and having all that on my watch? Or do I just try to find some sort of compromise that makes everybody happy and might cost them a lot, but at least gives them what they want? And of course, that's, according to Sforno, that is in fact what he does here. He decides, okay, they really want this land so badly, I will in fact give them this land. But there were two main stipulations that he really made. And he had to see those stipulations being met in order to feel that these people were deserving of this compromise. And those stipulations were, you have to have the right priorities, and you have to acknowledge God as being the one who actually gives you that land. Right? You acknowledge those two things, then you'll be, and you do all the other stuff that you have to do. You'll fight and do all the other stuff. But that's the big thing. Check your priorities and acknowledge God, and then we'll let we'll give in to your request. And of course, they're willing to do that because there's clearly something about this land that they absolutely had to have, that they were willing to literally go to war for it. So, so it seems so strange. Like, how could it be that they set up on this other side of the Jordan? How could it be that Moses was so willing to acquiesce and to give in to such it seems like a petty request? And we see that there's actually a lot going on there. And of course, it seems like in the end, everybody was relatively happy. And by actually having them on that side of the Jordan, it actually secures even more safety for them, ensures more security for them, because you don't have to worry about enemy tribes coming up and blocking off the river or doing certain things to it. Right? They have full control over the waterway because you have Israelites on both sides now. So militaristically and economically, it probably was a pretty good decision. But yeah, and it actually does mesh up with some of the descriptions of the land that God was giving us anyways. Yeah, Phil, you have to unmute yourself.
That was my question, because does all of a sudden the land of Israel that God had intended to give to the Israelites in exchange for them following the commandments, etc., do any scholars think that this was an expansion of that original idea, or do they think that this was just, it was meant to be this way? Because it's almost a third of the land, of what Israel is at that point.
Well, what turns out is actually this land keeps expanding anyways, right? Under Saul, the land expands. Under David, the land expands. Under Shlomo, the land expands. And so it's not entirely clear what are in fact the borders of Israel. Because at some points in the Torah and the Tanakh, they are in fact quite vague and very expansive. So they may not have actually been rejecting God as much as we might want to think they're doing. But what they clearly do, however, is they pay a price. They pay a steep price. If this is what they want, and they're able to meet that, and they go to fight. And not only do they go to fight, but they hang out and make sure that everybody is secure until they actually get to settle in the land before they then return back and settle in their own land. So it's actually
modern day Jordan and Syria, right? Basically.
What's that?
That would be it would be Jordan.
This is Jordan here. Right, Syria and Lebanon are going to be up here.
You're right.
And then, we're all the way down in the Sinai down here.
Got it.
So, yeah, it's not such a bad deal for the Israelites. But I think more than anything else, what probably is going on here is an ideological story trying to help us understand why these people are in the regions where they are. How did we come to have an alliance of Israelites with all these tribes wherever they're located? And we'll Right, this is where they already were, and so let's try to figure out a nice little story that explains why that in fact is where they are. But that's a learning for a whole other class, and really completely different approach to studying the Bible than a rabbi is equipped to do. So, any other questions, thoughts, comments, and all this stuff that we see here? No? Yeah, Joel.
I noticed at 24, you mentioned that they need to do what proceedeth out of their mouths. And it rang a bell that this ties in with nader, with vow.
Which is at the very beginning of the.
Before this.
That's a good tie-in, right? What the very beginning of Parshat Matot is conversation around vows, and especially what happens if a woman makes a vow. Is she held accountable to it, or can her husband/father invalidate it? But it's the whole idea of making vows. No, I like that. That which you have said, right? We're going to hold you to it, and there is a price to those vows. And the price is the worth of a person, and whether it's the worth of a person for making a dedication to a financial contribution to the hekdesh, to that which is holy, for the service of Adonai, or if it's just a dedication literally of your body to be a fighter, right? There's going to be a payment that is required for this vow. I like that. It's a nice tie-in, Joel. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? No. All right. So I will I'll bless you all with a wonderful Bastille Day. I hope you eat tons of croissant, croque and
Sounds good. Thank you, Rabbi.